Hey everybody, just give me a couple minutes and I'll be right with you. Just gonna get situated here. All right, welcome back everybody. If you're joining me again, I don't think anybody's joining me live, but for anybody that wants to watch this after the fact. Oops. There we go. All right. So what we're gonna do here today is unbox this Presto Cutterhead that a client sent to me for a full rebuild. So that means I'm gonna take it completely apart and I'm going to work on every part of it, basically. So we'll make sure that everything is properly restored first, and then I will make coils for it. So make replacement coils, brand new coils, which will involve actually making, machining some what are called bobbins. So the things that you wind coils onto. And if you're familiar with sewing, it's exactly like that sort of a thing, that sort of a thread bobbin, but for enameled wire. And if you take a long enough length of enameled wire and you wrap it in a circular fashion, you can create an electromagnet. It's not hard. So that's the basis of every speaker, is some sort of an electromagnet system. It's the basis of every cutter head, whether it's mono or stereo, doesn't matter. It's the basis of most all, I would say, transducer systems. So transducers are, it's just a term that means it can trace from one signal to another, basically. And so in this case, it can physically trace the movements of this electronic signal. It can transcribe an electronic pulse. Or it could do it the other way around. It could be used like a microphone to actually transcribe the movement of air molecules to represent sound in a recording fashion. So playback or capturing. And I did this way so that I don't care about my P.O. box, which is where this goes to, but of course I don't want to divulge my client's address, so I opened it upside down. So judging from the serial number, somebody showed me the serial, and it does not end in or excuse me, it doesn't start with a P. So, all the 1Cs, actual 1Cs, have a P in their number. This one is 9469, which indicates to me that at least the frame, the body, right? Here, I'll put this in a way so that you guys can see it, maybe. So right there on the frame, right by where my finger just was, is where that serial number is. And this will autofocus. Yeah, there you go. So there's no P, no letter P as in Paul in there. And that means to me that this, at least the body part, is a 1D. But I'm looking at the cover right now. And the cover actually is for a 1C from what I can tell. So, right there, I think, let me grab my magnification. Yep, correct. So this cover does not match the actual cutter head itself, the body of the head. And that's not uncommon, Like I've seen a lot of heads that have been Frankensteined together, if you will, have been put together from multiple pieces of multiple other heads, and that's what you end up seeing. Also, too, there are some minor changes to some parts on the inside. So I've seen a lot of people have, over the years, done repairs inside, and some of those parts are actually, mismatched as well. You can tell. So what I'm going to do real quick is get myself a piece of paper, because quite frequently I like to do this sort of work so what I'm saying here is that I usually like to do this sort of stuff on a piece of construction paper. It's just helps to keep my table, what's left of the surface of it, as is, and also too, just, you know, shit falls out sometimes or whatever. I shouldn't do that. I'm gonna try to refrain from cursing from now on in all of my videos, not just here, but on YouTube as well. This allows you to clean stuff up if little bits of you know, just stuff, material ends up coming out of here, because sometimes these are just full of stuff. Some people have had these, you know, sitting in attics. Some people had them sitting in their basements, which got flooded. Some people had these sitting in barns forever. So, I mean, you know, there's all sorts of stuff on the inside generally. FYI, anybody that sends me a cutter head, please don't send them to me with this guy in the head. Even if you wrap it in bubble wrap, these can take enough of a hit in transit that when it gets to me, sometimes these are bent. Because, you know, this is inside of the stylus holder, and it does go above the case even if you screw it all the way in. And if this thing takes a hard enough hit, yeah, that can, not only can this bend, but it can also, you know, then lead to internal problems. So generally, you know, like when I send this back to a client, I will take this guy and I will tape it to a piece of cardboard. And that piece of cardboard will go in with the cutter head. And that way, this, you know, can't cause problems like that. So also, generally speaking, I like to start bagging stuff up. So let me grab some bags. Hey, Bobby. So, you know, component bags are generally great for this purpose. Okay, well, so something like these, and then, you know, like this. So right now, I'm going to take the one part that I've removed, which is just the stylus screw, and stick it into this bag. You guys probably didn't hear any of that. What I said was, you know, these component bags are what are usually used to house parts in for a repair. And then this guy, you know, are going to put a lot of the little parts in. And the first one out is, of course, the stylus screw that I just removed. After we're done with this repair, I'm definitely going to be replacing this wiring. So this stuff will go. I will save it for the client if they want to keep that. And then I can also, you know, replace these guys. So we'll take that stuff off in a bit with the soldering iron. But first thing to come off is the screw right here for the case. And 9 times out of 10, if anybody's opened this thing up, this comes off real easy. If no one's opened this thing up recently, that's a bear usually to get off. Immediately, this case does not want to come off of here, so something's stuck, which is not great. Okay, I think the case is just a little deformed. Yes, it is. I can see it is a little bit, so it's pinching. So we'll try to resolve that a bit. But yeah. Another thing you can do when you're taking these apart is just use this case to start holding some parts, but it does have holes in it, so that's not really always the best thing to do, but you can actually do that. I'm going to start, like I said, putting all my little stuff like screws and things like that in here. So the next thing to come off is the back part. There we go. The back cover. So this will be the back cover, and it covers the back section which holds the main pieces for the cutter head. It's what I call the backpack. So this back section I call the backpack. This middle section I call the frame, right? I'm sure there was proper terminology for all this, but that's what I call it. For anyone watching at home, these two screw holes right here are, I think that's number 8. They're imperial threaded, and I can't remember, they're 8s or 10s or something like that. They're standard threading for the United States, and that is how this cutter head attaches to an overhead and can then travel across the disc. So this is the mounting point, is right here, these two screw holes. Typically also, people will send me heads with those screws. I don't need them. So FYI on that, anybody that wants to send me a head, you don't have to send those to me because, yeah, I don't need them. Not only are they standard, man, this also, it's a weird head. That didn't want to come off easily either. One thing that you'll normally see with these, because it is chromed, or I should say nickel plated, that nickel plating will come off over the years. So especially like around, this hole right here, or on the inside, like in the bend right there. I mean, you can sort of see some scratches, like right there, where the base metal is sort of shining through. So let's put this guy, the other case part. So now you can see sort of some of the internal parts, right? So what we've got is, my camera doesn't like to get real close with, and actually focus still. It wants to not do that. So those guys right there, this thing and this thing are springs, and those go. Those go, and without proper replacements, those will make the head sound bad. Not only that, it won't trace correctly, so you'll get you'll get distortions, not just sort of a capping of frequencies, but you'll get distortions in the tracing, especially around the points where the waveform itself, as audio travels, you've got these peaks and valleys, right? So you've got positive excursion, you go to your 0 line, and then you've got negative excursion, you go to your 0 line, and that sort of sinusoidal waveform repeats, right, in different frequencies. And the changing patterns are what we recognize as like actual and distinct sounds. But the point of the matter is, it's all this sort of sinusoidal motion, and at the points where that waveform, it has 0 velocity, so at the peaks and at the troughs, those will get distorted if these springs are not in good condition, of course, because they help in that motion. Also too, they keep tension, so they are what I call a tensioning mechanism, right? So every mono cutter head pretty much has a couple of basic elements. It's got a pivot, and in this particular model, that pivot is right there. It's a knife edge, and the armature sort of does this sort of thing on the knife edge. In other cutter heads, it's actually different types of mechanisms. So there are some that have sort of a bar that goes into a hole, and this bar will have a piece of rubber around it, and so that rubber is acting as a damper, and it's also acting as the pivot point, right? So in every mono cutter head, you've got a pivot, you've got a dampening mechanism, which allows high frequencies to sort of not be overtaken by the momentum of low frequencies, which are easy to achieve in any transducer. And you've got, in nicer heads, not in every head, so for instance, in a Presto 5C, there is not this sort of nice tensioning mechanism. There's a very cheap one. This one is nice because it not only provides tension, it also centers the stylus when there's no signal being applied to this cutter head. So at 0 volume, the stylus will go back to, if it's actually calibrated and assembled correctly, the stylus should go back to being perpendicular with the body, right? Because of this sort of equalized spring mechanism. Without that the stylus will sort of drag. And if not on the disc, it could be cocked, right? So when you go to apply it, it might not be nice and straight. So the beginning of your groove won't be nice. Also, as it's cutting, it will wiggle, and that will add background noise to your cut. Having a sort of tensioning mechanism like this will reduce background noise in your cuts because it's forcing the stylus to be rigidly held in place when there's no current going through the coils, when there's no excitation of the EM system. This actually keeps the stylus stable, which means the groove will be straight and not wiggling, which means that playback will not have these little noises in it, because any movement of the groove will end up as noise, of course, on playback. So in a stereo, like a pro stereo head, this does not exist, because in fact in stereo pro feedback cutter heads, you try to have actually as little tension as possible. So I'm giving away a huge secret right there. In mono heads, dynamic heads, you need to apply tension to your stylus. In stereo heads, that is actually provided by the feedback. So if you turn feedback off, like when you're cutting some test groove on like a Neumann lathe, if you go and you turn feedback off, which you can totally do as you're cutting, you'll notice that there's immediately a bunch of background noise in your cut. And that is due to exactly what I just explained, because the feedback itself is providing this tension, this resistance to movement that might be generated by just slicing through the disc with no excitation of the EM system. So again, in a stereo feedback head, that stuff's handled by the actual feedback mechanism. And in mono heads, the nicer the head, the more stiff the tension is on the stylus. So for instance, in a Grampian sounds so shrill because it's got a torsion bar system. So in Grampians, it's actually a piece of metal that bends. Like, so that joint doesn't pivot. It actually is a torsion bar. So in that case, the pivoting is actually a piece of metal that's flexing, which is interesting. Anyway, I digress. So next thing to do would be to take, oh, I'm sorry, I did leave out one thing. So every mono cutter head has a pivot. It's got a dampening. It's nice, it's got some sort of tensioning, and nice ones have, equalized tension, which causes the stylus to center with no audio. And then, of course, every mono cutter head has a magnet and has some sort of coil system. So altogether, we'll call that M and EM system just an EM system, right? So every mono cutter head has some sort of EM system. You can see right now, there's like some oil and stuff. So clearly, that's another reason why I like to use a little piece of something right there. So not just physical stuff, but oil and dirt and whatever. Trying to actually think about where the oil is coming from. Like, why? Just why? Anyway, so one thing that we're going to have to do is remove the damper. To remove the damper, you got to remove these screws, and sometimes those don't come out easy. And in fact, I can kind of see a little bit that they are a little tiny bit beat up. So somebody has already gone in there. If they don't come out easy, I will have to remove everything else and then put this whole thing with the screws into my sonic cleaner. So I'll show you guys that in a little bit, or maybe not in this session, but every part in here will get cleaned first in this ultrasonic bath that I have. And sometimes stuff that's stuck, I don't try to just jam it out, because you're going to ruin either the threads of the hole or the tip of the screw or whatever. Just throw it in the ultrasonic cleaner first and try to unstick a lot of things, because things will come apart. Man, I've had screws that it just would not budge, but I throw it in there for like 30 minutes and it actually works itself out. So I've literally had that happen. So let's see what these are going to move like real quick. All right. And having an array of screwdrivers. In fact, I usually use one other one, but I recently messed up the tip on it accidentally, so I have to replace it. It's part of this Husky set, so I have to replace it. It's a bummer because it was just a really handy size. It was like the one size smaller diameter or width tip than this one, and it was a little bit longer, and it was perfect for these. But so I'm losing my sight a little bit, so I should really be doing this with. In fact, I'm gonna grab them. I'm gonna get my readers real quick because that's just helpful. Yeah, so not all the time, but sometimes I use a pair of readers. My eyes are a little tired today, so this will be helpful. There you go. Now I can actually see things. Won't embarrass myself anymore here. So that one came off easy. So I'm sort of suspicious of this because it seems to me like somebody's been in here at some point in time to mess with something, just because of how easy that came out. I'm not seeing signs of corrosion or yeah, I mean, in general, it came out shiny. So to me, that means somebody's been in here. At the same time, just looking at those coils, those are not original factory, I don't think. It's possible. I just don't recognize the glue, to be honest with you. It looks different than a lot of the glue that I've seen. So that's a little different. But it's possible. I mean, like this is a later, this is in the 9000, so 9469 serial. This is one of the later ones made. It wouldn't surprise me towards the end if they just didn't care about things anymore, or, severed ties with certain suppliers or whatever. I think they cheapened things up towards the end. For sure, I can tell you that parts for the 1D, the metallurgy changed a bit, and I actually like the 1C parts better, the internal parts. Other than that, I mean, like they changed the size of the damper, but I've made a conversion kit. If you want a larger damper, I can make a conversion for the actual 1C. So clearly, again, this is a 1D internal and a 1C cover and I can tell because not only the length of this guy, but because it actually has the mounts the holes for this crossbar, which doesn't exist in the 1Cs. This guy is held on. The damper in the 1Cs has a piece of metal and two pieces of metal on either side right here. And in the middle, there's a hole. And so there's a screw that holds all that together. And the pieces of metal are what hold the end of the rubber taut. In this case, this is all the stuff up here. So again, that indicates that this is, even though it's covered with the 1C, this is definitely 1D. And again, even these screws, everything's coming apart very easily. So somebody was in here. I mean, clearly somebody didn't replace the coils, but somebody took this apart. So what you'll find a lot of times is people had to do some repairs, like either change out the wiring or it got yanked, even though there is what's called a strain relief. Sometimes, these things, whatever, something gets caught right here and yanks past the strain relief, and that can definitely cause a disconnection. So it's not uncommon for people to get in here just to try to fix some soldering type issues. But yeah, it just, to me, again, it's like this is coming apart very easily. So somebody tried to do something with it at one point in time. But that's okay. So, immediately if this part doesn't just, come right off, there's threading on the round part of the top of the stylus holder. So, this unscrews. So don't just try to pull it off, unscrew it off. Sometimes this piece isn't actually threaded on there or anything. It's just that it's getting sort of caught on the rubber. But like, you know, sometimes this piece is, how can I say, corroded onto there. And so just to sort of avoid, you know, disaster, don't just rip it straight off. It's best to turn it off. Also too, inside of this piece of rubber, there is a metal sleeve right there, you can see. So don't lose that, you know, keep that with your parts, right? So you can see I'm just collecting all these parts. And then this guy I'm gonna put right in here with these stuff. All right, and you can see already, not just oil, but there's like little bits of that rubber. And then, yeah, I will be able to, you know, if they want, because it looks like this thing is pretty well shot, you know, it's done. The main part of it is okay, but right here where it actually gets tied down, because there's a reason why there's 4 screws and 2 pieces of metal to hold this thing, and it's because if it's loosely coupled with the armature, it does no good at all. It has to actually provide some gumminess for, because when the stylus moves this thing, right, the stylus sticks out this way and it will go like this. And so that means that there is rotation at this point right here at my finger, right? So this whole thing rotates, right? And so if it's not very well firmly connected to this piece of rubber, then this piece of rubber does not perform the dampening function that it's supposed to perform, right? So it doesn't, so people are always like, wow, it's so much bigger, so that's, you know, it's got to be so much better. Well, maybe, sort of. I mean, most of the motion in this material is sort of isolated to right here anyway. So, I mean, a lot of this is not really doing anything. But yeah, no, bigger's better always, of course. Anyway, point of the matter is I can cut these on my CNC machine. So that's not, and in fact, from a different type of rubber than this is made from, which I would argue is probably better at doing its job. So right now you can see, and I guess actually, you know, now looking at this part of it, those do actually look like original coils. So I think they just sort of changed some glue towards the end. Because normally this glue actually will look more like, and in fact, what I use is wood glue. So in place of this stuff, I use, you know, it's just a natural fiber glue, wood glue, and it seems to work really, really well for the purpose. And it seems to be, it seems to be very similar to how this stuff flakes apart. You know what I'm saying? You can see what I'm doing with the screwdriver right there. Anybody that's seen old wood glue, it flakes apart in almost exactly the same manner. So I'm pretty sure that what they were using was something close to that. So that's what I use, just letting everybody know. Anyway, those two, yeah, I mean, just the neatness of everything and how these are like perfectly length and all that. This might actually be original. Anyway, I will recharge this magnet, so I have a means with which to not only measure the strength of this magnet to see if it needs to be recharged, but I will guarantee you that it probably does. And what ends up happening is one side will become sort of imbalanced usually. So one side will measure, or at least certain areas of it will measure out of balance. And so that's obviously problematic. That will cause that will cause one either positive or negative excursion of the waveform. So one direction of excursion to be unnaturally exaggerated, right? So if you had a waveform that should have excursion positive, same exact as negative, it would be imbalanced, and one side would be have more excursion, more amplitude than the other. So you want to make sure that this is evenly charged and in the areas where it should be, which is to fill this gap. I mean, that's what it does. The horseshoe magnet, one end is a north, one end is a south. If you were to look at if you were to put this under a piece of paper and sprinkle filings, you know, just like we did in grade school, you would see the flux lines. And the way that flux lines come out are sort of in this this sort of arcing pattern, right? But if you have the two poles close together, so what a horseshoe magnet is it's just a bar magnet. You have a bar magnet with a north and a south pole, and you bend it. And so now the two poles that would have been just on a straight line come close together. And when that happens, you get flux lines that go perpendicular to the actual length of each one of those poles. So if this is the north and this is the south, you will have flux lines that go at a 90-degree angle. And that's important for the way that this stuff works, okay? So in general, you want to have flux lines from your magnet at 90 degrees to the flux lines for your electromagnet, okay? And I mean, that's a simplistic way of saying it, 90 degrees of what, on what plane or whatever, right? So in these, you don't have to worry about it as much, but actually in a stereo feedback, you know, pro head, you actually want to think about three-dimensional flux density way more than in one of these guys. You know, here it's pretty well simple gap, but like, even in here, in my own version of this head that I have created, my modernized version of a Presto, I have taken into account creating a three-dimensional flux environment, which goes beyond just the simple horseshoe magnet. So I have an array of neodymiums, and that array has been created and crafted in a very particular way in order to get the flux that I want. So you can use horseshoe, you can do all sorts of other things. You don't have to necessarily use a horseshoe, but that's the ins and outs of what's happening here. Is you're getting flux to go this way, basically. And then if you want to actually directionalize that, you would use what are called pole pieces. So that's what these things are under my finger right here. And in a transformer, any kind of power transformer, in order to channel, or motor, stator, in order to channelize flux, you generally have a sandwich of thin sheets, thin pieces of sheet steel. It's because steel will carry flux. But if you just have a big blob of steel, that will not propagate flux as nicely and in this sort of directionalized way as you would if you had sheets of steel that you sort of sandwiched together. So these pole pieces are like that. They're actually sandwiched pieces. So there's actually many individual sheets, and that piece is riveted together. So I'll show you that when I get it apart. There are some rivets that hold those sheets together, and that helps to channelize and distribute that flux into the coils in order to make this piece of steel, which is sitting in all the middle of that, move in exactly the way that you want it to move. So that's the end result, is to just excite movement in this piece of steel, because this piece of steel will generate what are called eddy currents. So anytime you've got an electromagnetic system like this, and you've got a piece of metal that can take a field and create internally a charge, which then, or not charge, current, which then by itself creates an additional EM field of its own. This is sort of referred to as an eddy current, right? So that field that is generated by the eddy current is in opposition to the field that actually is responsible for creating that eddy current. And so the long and the short of that is, if this thing is itself creating its own sort of field around itself, right, that's in opposition to the major field that it's being subjected to, it will of course move in opposition, because that's what ends up happening with a magnet. When you've got two pieces of a magnet, if you've got the same pole pieces, it will want to attract. If you've got opposites, it will want to repel. But the point of the matter is, if you've got opposites, they attract, like what just happened there, and that thing will move. And if you've got if you're generating a field that is going positive and then going negative, then you'll have movement in varying directions. And so that's how an EM system works, basically. That's how this is working. This thing is being the metal of it is sort of being forced to go one way or another. It's fighting you through eddy currents, but it's also just a piece of metal, period. So the fields that are being generated by the coils and the interaction with the magnetic flux from the magnet, right, is causing this variable magnetic field inside of there. So, I mean, majorly, the motion from this thing is a result of it being attracted to one side, one pole or another. As the audio shifts from, positive to negative excursion, that signal, this whole system will go flip from, being centric to one pole or another pole, and so that piece of metal will want to go either way. I was explaining the eddy signal stuff because that's something that you have to take into consideration, both in a motor as well as a cutter head design. And so eddy currents are sort of an issue, right? That will cause your transducer or motor to, not be as efficient as possible. So there's a lot of things that are going on here in the design, is the point I'm trying to make, that aren't necessarily just obvious by looking at it. But majorly, the point of the matter is, if I were to go ahead and loosen up these springs, that guy will automatically want to stick to one side or another. This armature will just go blip or blip, whatever, and that sort of by itself tells you how this thing works. So with no tension, it will want to just jump onto there. When there's tension and there's an actual field being generated, it does the same thing. It wants to be attracted to one side or another. And so that's forcing excursion. So anyway, without further ado, let's get further into this guy. So again, another place where sometimes you run into stuck screws are these guys. I'm gonna just guess that this is gonna be exactly like the other ones, and these are gonna come out with like butter. I usually use a long screwdriver for this because those can be quite tight sometimes, and sometimes you really need the torque. Now, of course, like I thought, like that, I probably could have undone that with my fingers. So again, somebody's been in here. I'm starting to suspect that the person who sent this to me has been in here, and they want me to do the work so that they can see what I did. This person is also an engineer, so that would be my suspicion. But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. So, excuse me. This guy comes right off, but you want to put it on something metal, right? So a lot of times you'll see a horseshoe magnet with what's called like a minder or a keeper or whatever, a piece of steel that will go across the poles and keep this thing from demagnetizing. So that's one way to do it. I mean, you could just stick it onto, like I've just done right now. You can stick it onto like metal housing like that or something. It doesn't matter as long as it's something steel to go in between those two guys. But also too, it doesn't really matter because I'm going to recharge it. I have the means with which to, like I said earlier, not only measure the Gauss, the strength of the magnet, I can also recharge it. So it's not really an issue. Yep, and again, just coming out like it's no problem. So somebody's done something in here at some point in time. Because these just never come out like that. So, or this was just kept very well over the years. That's also, I guess, a possibility. This might have been, some recording engineer, and so they would just naturally take care of their gear. I don't know. But there are these little washers, and they are important. They are very important. A lot of people don't understand that. You can't just use a screw to hold these pole pieces down. These things have to be adjusted really finely, and without those washers, that adjustment will be lost immediately. So those help to keep the adjustments that you need to make on these guys. And that's something that, again, like that's giving you guys secrets right there. Is a lot of people think that these are what are used to calibrate these cutter heads, and that's part of it, but actually no. I mean, what's most important is the positioning of the goddamn coils. Like I was trying to get at earlier, even in my cutter head, I have an array that makes sure that the flux is exactly where it needs to be. And yeah, guess what? Same thing here. So these guys have some play to them. They move around a little bit, you know, like both this way and that way. And without those washers, you can't really lock them down appropriately, and you'll lose the positioning that you know spent a lot of time to work out. And so what I'll end up doing is, once I get this thing back together, after I've done all the work on all the parts, I will be running audio through it, and I will be adjusting those pole pieces like a shitload until they are in just exactly the right place for the coils that I have in it and everything else. Now again, part of all of that is down here, but honestly, you really don't muck with this stuff a lot. Once you get the proper tension and even tension on both sides, you leave it the F, just leave it alone. So anybody that has one of these heads and thinks that they can go in and make some adjustments here, don't. Okay, just don't. Here's another reason why. Once you start to make adjustments there, the armature will actually start to hit one of the pole pieces, and you can do damage to those springs, man. You can do damage to your armature. So don't mess with that stuff unless you can actually see. And so one of the things when I'm making these adjustments, okay, I will be doing this all the time. I don't have the screws on to hold the magnet down. I have those off, and I have the magnet like this on the pole pieces, and I am adjusting the pole pieces until they are just right. And more importantly, as I'm doing that process, I can see in right here, and I can see, and I can see the gap. So there is, and I'm never going to be able to zoom in and focus on that with this camera, but there should be a very small hair, like a paper thin gap in between the armature that holds the stylus and the two pole pieces. Because if there isn't, then it's going to be clanging against the pole piece, and that will cause obvious audible distortions. So if you get one of these heads and it sounds like something's clanging, you know, like actually banging, that's what's happening. But more importantly, I never make adjustments to these tension springs without being able to see this gap, right? So if you don't have the cover off and the rubber damper off, do not adjust those, because you are just going to end up messing it up and potentially damaging some parts. You know, I definitely recommend that anybody that gets a head restored from me should have those springs replaced. There is no reason to not have me install clones that I have made for those springs, because obviously you're never going to find any, you know, like no one that I know outside of one person, who was Al Grundy, had a bag of original replacements. I'm trying to track down where they went to. But in the meantime, I have figured out how to make clones of these. I know the exact type of metal to use. I know how to put the bends in like that. I know how to finish the ends appropriately. All of it. So again, if you want these things to sound right, and not only sound right, but actually not distort, to trace accurately, those little pieces of metal are super important. So anyway, these guys just both come out. They were literally there was some glue that you can still see bits of that were holding the coils kind of to these guys in place, everything in place right there. So I'm just sort of chipping this stuff off with my fingernails, which need to be trimmed. I'm a beast right now. Let me just take this moment. So the music that we are listening to is all written by myself and a guy named Chris Grabowski, K-Rad. So he and I, essentially own the license for all of the music that you hear. Any of the samples are fair use because we have reinterpreted them in some way, shape, or form. All the video mixing that you see on the right is work that I did. So this is my video mixing. I do use clips from various licensed sources. However, they are all reinterpreted and run through effects. So this is my reinterpretation. So it falls under fair use. Outside of that, again, I am Todd Mariana, Upcode 66. Deep Grooves Mastering. I do have a channel on YouTube, and I would really appreciate it if people would go there and subscribe. So I'm trying to get to monetization. So all that out of the way. These are the things that I was talking about earlier, which are it's stamped pieces of metal from a sheet of metal, and it's riveted together, glued and riveted together, and then nickel plated. So when I'm done with these guys, they are going to be spotless and they're going to be shiny. Why? Because I want it, because I'm like a OCD or something? No. No. I wouldn't waste my time. These need to be perfectly clean because they are the heart of the EM system. And if they are not perfectly clean, that actually reduces the efficiency of the EM system. So yeah, they're going to get perfectly cleaned. So these guys, oops, I'm gonna go on with a different bag. All right, I could go into more detail on those, but I think I've kind of beaten a dead horse there. So the next thing that I'm gonna do is to take out the armature and the springs and stuff, but before I do that, it'd be easier for me to take off this wiring. So let's get that off real quick. I'm gonna turn my soldering iron on here. So, nothing special, nothing fancy, regular old Weller. Which has been acting up, so we'll see if it wants to participate in today's adventures. And by the way, if Chris Grabowski is out there or listening, or anybody knows Chris or whatever, tell him I miss him. Like, for real. Tell him to call me or something. That'd be awesome. I would like to actually have a conversation with the guy, because I miss him, for real. I miss you, Chris, if you're out there, dude, for real. So let me desolder these. I'm just going to heat up this point, and take the stuff off, and then get the other guy. But to do that, I'm gonna, oops, I'm gonna kick the stand of my camera twice. I'm gonna grab a pair of tweezers because it'll just be easier. There we go. So what guys used to do back in the day, and this is how you always find these on almost all types of mono cutter heads. There will be just a peg that wiring is soldered to, and so the coil wire is wrapped around like 2 or 3 times, and it's always wrapped around on top of the actual connection wire. So the connection wire is wrapped around the base of this peg, and then around the top of the peg, it gets the enameled wire wrapped, and then you sort of press down the one on the other, and you glue. That's what solder is, by the way, everybody. Solder is just simply metal glue. That's all there is to it. And it should never take the place of 2 pieces of metal making contact. So solder itself is not what's making the electrical connection. You really need to have bare wire. So usually I will strip the end of these by using an X-Acto or a razor blade to just go over the end of that enameled wire very lightly to remove the enameling and expose the bare metal. And then I'll wrap it around there, and that will just make it easier. You can just use a soldering iron, but that will make your solder really dirty if you melt the enamel in there, so that's not really great to do. It's good to get the enamel off first, and then wrap it around the bare wire on this peg, and then use solder to hold everything together, again, as just metal glue, not as a means of forming an electrical connection. Never use solder in place of actually having two bare pieces of metal touching, and then the solder goes on top of that. So just FYI, everybody. So I'm going to remove the coil wires first on both of these, and then I will, I'll get the rest of it off. Whoops. There we go. And so what you just see, what just happened, and this might be why this came to me. I didn't actually check for connectivity, continuity. I didn't either measure resistance or if there is actually a connection on this, because this is a full rebuild, so I'm taking it all apart. It doesn't matter if it was blown or not, but this came off so easily that I'm starting to wonder if this came to me because it wasn't working, or if it was, man, this was right about to break anyway. So that piece of enamel wire was about to go. So I'm sure this thing sounded like shit or had really low response because there was a point in the wire that was bent so many times that it was cracked and it was about to sever. So, I mean, literally that took nothing for it to come off. So yeah. So this guy, you can see I'm moving it and stuff and it's not breaking. It's still attached to the coil. So I think that this probably had some shitty response based on that alone. Now, what really would be nice is to be able to just pull this coil out, but there's not enough clearance on the back of the armature inside of that cavity to get that off. You actually have to remove the armature or break the coil. So it's sort of a pain in the ass. It's just a consequence of the size of this arrangement and the design, so just FYI to everybody on that. And that's the way they are in all of them. Doesn't matter which model, it's all the same. You can't get the back coil off without removing the armature. Okay. And then this block, this piece of black stuff is as far as I know, it's Bakelite, or what, maybe not. Maybe it's not officially Bakelite because that is it's a brand name, but it's that compound of plastic, and not even plastic, of resin, of a material that after it's cast doesn't melt. Basically that's the deal with this shit, is you can expose it to extreme amount of heat and it won't melt. It will eventually just sort of ash up, but it doesn't melt. It will break down at some point, but it doesn't melt. So small screw holding that guy on. It's usually a good time right now, and there's no washer on this screw either. It's just a screw. I will use, and also too, this screw is longer than other ones, so it's identifiable. You can tell. It's also interchangeable with these, but you can also usually tell it from the back ones because these will have the same sort of wear or appearance usually, as far as the patina on the metal. It will have the same sort of state of corrosion, or if somebody polishes this thing a lot, then those will both be shiny. The internal one will look different But they are interchangeable. What I usually do right now will be to clean this guy up too, like to try to get some of this excess solder off, usually. Or at least make it smooth so that you can actually get something back on there eventually. But sometimes there will be like, you know, little bits of wire, like a hair of wire or something. So you want to just kind of get that crap off. And right now is the perfect time to do that while you've got your soldering iron out. You may as well. I look over and I see one lone person. So thank you, one lone person, for hanging out and watching my stream. Check out what I do. So thank you. That's awesome. You are appreciated. So, you know, again, I will actually wash this part later, but that's good enough for now. Ow! It just burned my finger on it. I'm gonna dump the bits and pieces of solder and stuff that's on here right now. So again, this is why I like to use a little piece of construction paper while I'm working. Oh, it's just really handy usually. These are the one screws that seem like somebody didn't actually try to remove. Maybe. No, I guess they just tightened them. So they're, again, there's nothing's corroded on here. So either somebody really kept very good care of this thing over the years and kept it like in a, you know, air-conditioned house and with the, you know, control of or moisture and stuff. Just seems like it was well taken care of. Or somebody took it apart and that's why the screws are all coming apart easy. I will tell you the one set of screws that no one messes with generally, and so these will be usually locked up like corroded locked, right? So if you're trying to take what I call, again, the backpack, these back pieces off, those screws generally, or the ones on the side right here that hold the two outer edge parts to the middle cross member, those will usually be pretty mucked up. Very hard to move. Best to throw the whole thing in a bath first before you try to mess with these, or to try to take the backpack off the base plate. Obviously in my head, all of these parts were plastic originally, but now only stuff that's plastic on my head is stuff that it is not a part of the EM system, you know, so all of these things are brass on mine, and then on mine this is a piece of aluminum, and then you know, there are some plastic parts inside, and of course the outer case is plastic because it doesn't matter. The outer case performs no function other than to protect the internals and to look pretty. That's it. In fact, if people are running these things and they're trying to get a lot of amplitude out of them, the case will actually keep heat in. So that's one thing, but at the same time, it also protects from every little piece of metal glomming onto, you know, loose metal, you know, attaching itself to the magnet. So that's another function, is to just keep the magnet from collecting a bunch of debris. So we're almost, you know, almost got this thing fully taken apart. Again, these coils won't come off until I actually remove this stuff. So we'll see how these guys move, if they move. So I need a different screwdriver. Where I would normally use the one that I said I need to replace, which sucks that it's broken. Let me unclip my mic. I'll be right back. I recently reorganized my workspace, and apparently I put these set of screwdrivers in a really genius place that I can't find. Okay, well, until I can find those, I think this one will do. Hey, Bobby. You're a good dog. You're a good boy. Yeah. Yeah, he's a good puppy. Alright. Dog is wondering what's up. What are you doing, man? So, these guys have locking retaining screws, which is what I'm trying to get at right now. And yeah, I unfortunately might not be able to get this guy fully open today because don't have this set of screwdrivers handy. I can't find them, so let me see what I can do. Let's see what we can do here. Yeah, that one's not going to do it either. Do with this. Maybe. These are all gonna be okay. I think that'll do it. Do I still have the thing for this guy? Nope. Are you for you? Oh, you're not. For you, do I have a tip that will work? Okay, here we go. Gee, wow, after going through like 300 different screwdriver kits and stuff, Again, are not the ones that I normally use for this work. I damaged the one screwdriver I typically use for this work, and then I haven't had anybody send me a head for a while, so I didn't bother to replace it. And now I'm embarrassed on a live stream because of it. So let me go ahead and see if this will do what I need to do. Be the size as well as the torque to safely remove one of these guys and not screw up the top. Now, if I did, I can also clone these guys. I have the correct threaded rod. I have a slotting machine that I can use to not only trim the correct length, but also slot the screw itself, so I can clone those. You can also use a lathe with a particular type of disc. I actually bought and restored an old school machine that is called a slotting machine. And what's unfortunate is if you try to like YouTube, or it's not YouTube, if you try to go on eBay and look for one of these types of things, you will only find slot machines. So it's tough to find a slotting machine, not a slot machine. And also too, I mean, these things don't generally exist anymore. A lot of people just use a lathe to do that sort of stuff. So these guys usually are crusted into there, so they don't always come out real easily. What I did was I first unscrewed the retaining screws. So that's what these are on the back, are screws that lock in the actual set screws that hold those springs and then the center pin in place. So before you go and try to remove the set screws, absolutely remove the locking screws first. Do not move these screws ever on the side without ensuring that you have removed the actual, and there are three, there's one for each set screw, the actual locking screws. So the locking screws are down here. They are the little ones. So these are the locking screws right there. These are the set screws, actually hold the springs in place. That's one of the springs right there. Let me yank out. And again, a pair of tweezers is usually good for this sort of stuff. So let me yank this guy out. He does seem to be, yep, this one is either corroded, or I've actually seen like people put stupid shit in heads like JB weld in places that it ought not be. I think that this one is just stuck. So it will unstuck once I get it out. Let me remove the other set screw, the middle set screw for the center pin that puts pressure on the knife edge. And so the reason why this thing will move so nice on the knife edge is because there is a center pin that holds it to the knife edge, right? So it does like that. And then on either side of that center pin are those two springs. So here is that center pin. And so the end of these set screws are either tapped or cupped, right? It just depends on if they're original or not. A lot of times people who make clone replacements don't go through the extra step of using a very small mill attachment to actually cup, to actually put more than just a cupping in, so that you can do this sort of thing, so that you can stick in either the pin or the spring and it will stay in there. If it's just cupped, then you can't do that, right? So these are original parts that I'm holding, or somebody actually cloned them appropriately and they put, they actually tapped out the end so that you can put these guys in and they'll stay in place. It's helpful when you go to put this all together, because otherwise if it's just cupped, then they will just be falling out as you're trying to reassemble this thing, which is a pain in the ass. So I just twisted this guy out. Again, anything that's stuck, you don't want to just pull. Don't pull, twist, right? Twist, and it will just naturally come apart. So this guy was just corroded inside of there. So I'm going to take all of these right now while I can see them all, before I accidentally brush them off my table or something, right? Religiously, when you do this stuff, keep track of it, right? Put it in a bag. make sure you count parts, right? So I have these things memorized. I know it's like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle to me, and I know every piece. I could recognize just by looking at the size of either the diameter or length of the screw. I could tell you what it's for, where it goes, etc. I could put these things together in my sleep. Hey, don't be licking the floor, buddy. There's never anything good on the floor. This is the armature. This is what the stylus goes into. It's what is actually caused to move by the flux that's around it, the changing flux. And the piece of it that sits on the knife edge, right, is right here. So there is a V slot that is carved into the end of this right here, right where I'm pointing with my finger. I know it's probably not the easiest to see all the details on these parts with this camera and lighting and everything, but suffice it to say, there is that's actually precision ground, right? So you can actually see at the top of it a rounded section. So this was a grind wheel that came in and did this, and that's the rounded part of the grind wheel right there at the end of the slot. But that grind wheel puts in this perfect V slot, right? So when I make these parts on my CNC machine, I'm holding this in in a vise. I have what's called a sign vise, or you can use a vise on a sign block. Either way, I'm holding this part in a vise on a 45-degree angle, and I come in with just a regular square-nosed mill, and I mill that out. So that's not as perfect, right, as the precision grinding. I am setting myself up to make a jig to do exactly that. I will be replacing that methodology soon to actually do precision grinding like this in-house. The problem is you have to, if you've got machining gear around and you're doing grinding, you really don't want them in the same area. Or if you do, you have to have great cleanup, because you don't want grind dust to get on the ways, the tracks of your machining gear. It's problematic. It will cause premature wear, and you'll have to be replacing stuff. So anyway, this thing is, normally these come out and they look not brown. So I don't know why this guy looks so oxidized, but it definitely is, man. Like they're normally a little bit more metallic shiny, and when I get this guy cleaned up, it will be more silver than brown. But right now it's really brown, browner than I've ever seen one of these, really, mostly. That didn't have signs of, you know, it being like underwater or something, right? The rest of this case was really clean. The screws came out really easily, so it's odd that this one part is looking that way. At this point, you don't have to take anything else apart, right? This is done. This will all go in my ultrasonic bath as is, and I will, after the bath, make sure that these screws are tight, right? So that I didn't disturb those, right? I will just make sure that everything is nice and tight as far as the screws that hold together the backpack 2, the plate, as well as these two right here that are for holding that the crossbar for holding the damper in place. So again, nothing else really needs to be done with this. It does have a smell to it, FYI, so if anybody's wondering. This stuff always smells, this cloth-coated wire, and the inside of this thing stinks of just old decay, you know, like one of these old box of something. So again, this will just all go with the other major parts, right? And all this stuff, except for the piece of rubber, will go in the ultrasonic bath, which I can show to you guys in a second. These, you know, I've got a whole stack of collection of you know, coils that are from heads that I've rebuilt. Don't need them. Don't generally want to reuse these coil forms. These actually seem like they might be usable, but generally speaking, when you're taking these out, they are so old and brittle that part of one of the sides of the bobbin will just naturally, easily come off. This one is actually, oops, okay, there, I just did. So it didn't take a lot to break this section off, you know. And looking at this guy, looking at how many turns there are and how fine the wire is, right? This looks to me, yeah, this is not a 500 ohm. This was you know, a 4 ohm or 8 ohm. This was not 500. If it was 500, the wire would be much finer than this, and there'd be many, 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 many more turns than what are in here. Again, this stuff, as far as I can tell, this is not Bakelite exactly. So if you've ever looked at the Bakelite has filler in it usually, right? So it's got like some kind of cloth or fiber or something in there. The actual plastic, not even plastic, but the compound that is mixed with something to create Bakelite is generally referred to as Catalin. Catalin is like, you know, guitar picks that look like sort of tortoise shell or dice, right? Old school dice. These things were typically always made out of that sort of plastic Catalin. And so as far as I can tell, that's kind of basically what this stuff is. I don't know exactly, and I don't care. I originally used nylon, and then I have started to use a different type of plastic. I told somebody who's big in this scene what that is, and then he went and told my competitor what it is. So I might as well just tell all of you guys what I use and what somebody overseas, who I won't name, who is ripping off my work, uses. And it's called Ultem, U-L-T-E-M, Ultem. It's a brownish colored plastic. It was created in the 80s. It is a sort of space age plastic, if you will. It actually does not have a higher melting point than nylon, but nylon gets gooey when it gets hot and it will deform. Ultem doesn't. So, and it's also extremely rigid, even thin. Nylon, when you start to machine it thin, so the edges, the outside walls of the bobbin, those are just will deform, or not just deform, but when you start to pack wire into it, it will become wider. And so if you machine these to an exacting size, and then you try to go and insert them into the gaps in the pole piece, if you've used nylon and you wind the coil, it will widen. And if you don't account for that just so, then you'll be having a real tough time trying to get your coils into those slots. And so starting with a plastic that not only will not misshape due to heat, but also is just rigid in general, will not become misshapen from rolling it. That's what you really want to start with. And so again, what I have been using, and I will tell you guys this because I just don't care about this work anymore. I honestly don't want to do a lot of these heads anymore. It's not a secret I really care about divulging. It's also not something that I use in my stereo head. So there you go. It's Ultem. So the person who stole that knowledge from me and gave it to somebody else undeservingly, big middle finger to you. The person who rips off my work and pretends, or not just mine, but mine, and who pretends like, you know, things that were made by Neumann or other people in the past, who either he's cloned or has shown a part that he didn't make. He says that he made it, but it's actually an original part. Yeah, that guy, also big middle finger to you, and you know who you are. So now that I got that out of the way. Also, too, by the way, everybody, I don't live in the past, so I don't care. It's awesome. It's totally what was done and what was gained by that is fine. And those people are total sociopaths. And, you know, karma has a way of working things out. So that's cool. You can rip off stuff that I figured out years ago that I no longer care about. That's totally fine with me. Because I'm just going to tell everybody anyway. And in fact, I'm probably going to show most all of this process. So, you know, the things that person went through great lengths to lie and cheat in order to get me to tell them, I'm probably going to divulge in this series of streams anyway. So this is the first. I am going to, you know, to do one of these heads, it's like 4 or 5 individual sessions. You can't just try to squeeze it all into one day, you know. I'm gonna have to make the coils and, you know, prepare them and stuff. I'm gonna have to wash the parts and, you know, clean them, polish them. You know, once all that's done, you have to do assembly. And then once assembly's done, you have to do calibration. And once calibration is done, you know, I usually send a bench test video to my client and make sure everything's cool with them. I might also have to, you know, clone a part to do these. The only part I see that's gonna need to be cloned is damper because it's shot. And then also I wanna replace those springs, but I already have some made. So, you know, again, this is going to be probably 4 or 5 sessions, and I don't really see a reason why I shouldn't show you guys everything. So stay tuned. You know, the next session will be, I'm not going to bore everybody by showing you, you know, the actual process of ultrasonic washing the parts because it's just loud and takes a while. But here, I'll show you the bath. So I'm just going to throw these things away because I don't need them. Again, I have a literal pile of old coils. This is what my bath looks like. I got this off eBay. Originally I had a smaller one, but this guy is great. You know, almost all of these you can control not only the temperature, but the amount of time that it will be on for. There's no control over intensity. It's just one intensity. There is almost always a basket kind of thing, and you do want to put your parts in something because you don't want them to be sitting directly on. You don't want them to be making contact with the metal liner of the tank. You want it to be sort of suspended in the liquid so that it can be, so that the ultrasonic waves can be affecting all of the sides. And also, too, you might want to turn parts and stuff halfway through, right? So that's that. Once the parts are all washed, that's when I will go ahead and so I think probably everybody heard most of that. Point of it was that's the tank. You can buy them on eBay. They'll have heat and time control. They usually have a basket too. You want your parts to be suspended in the liquid. You don't really want to be settled on the bottom of the tank or touching the sides of the wall. You use just regular water. You can put some other things in there, but honestly, they suggest you only use water because of other liquids won't have the same properties to allow propagation of that stuff of the ultrasonic waves, and then also could potentially react with the metal of the tank or whatever. Blah blah blah. They say just to use water, and that's what I typically always use is just water. If you've got a part that's really got a lot of oil on it or something like that, you could use some of that green clean stuff. That works great. But yeah, just water, and usually I will bathe the parts for 30 minutes, and I'll flip them and put some more time into it on the other side, and then I take them out and I lay them on paper towels, and I'll flip them and stuff. I'll make sure that all the water, all the moisture gets off, and then I will actually take a microfiber rag and then go over all the parts and make sure that they are not damp. And then sometimes I call it, sometimes I start the polishing process at that point. Either way, if I call it, then I put them all back into a plastic baggie. So as I'm working on this stuff, things come in and out of these plastic baggies from this point forward. So what I will generally do is put all the parts together. All right, so these are the case parts, putting into one bag here. And Then I have the pole pieces, and I've got all of the screws and other internal parts. So I'll make sure that this is closed securely. I'm going to put this in the other bag, and I will put the other bag with this. And that way now everything is together for this one head. When I would work on lots of heads at once, I would have multiple bags like this, right? And I'd have them labeled so I know whose is what. And that would allow me to work on each head and, and get them to different stages until completion. So when I come back at this guy, I will be pulling parts out of that little, out of these bags and throwing them in the wash and then starting to polish them. So on the next stream, I will probably start at the polishing process and maybe just show some video of the washing and prep there. And then once all the parts are polished, like I said, I will have to clone a piece and then it'll be reassembly, and then a different session will be calibration. So hopefully everybody will join me for those. I will be posting this up on YouTube right after this, so maybe you'll watch it there. Everybody that does watch my work, thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate any comments that you might want to leave or questions, either as comments here or YouTube or emails. Please don't hesitate to ask questions, and we'll see you all guys. I will see everybody soon. Please take care of yourself and be well, and I will see you later.